Welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is World War I, Part 2. And we're going to talk about 5 terms that, as you learn more about this time period and about this conflict, that these will be helpful as you engage with the materials. So let's get into it. So the first is an acronym, all right, AEF, all right, AEF. So this stands for the American Expeditionary Force. Now, during the era of the First World War, there was some concern at the beginning of the conflict on the part of the United States government that the public wouldn't openly support the conflict and that the public wouldn't volunteer as quickly as the government would like them to. To that end, as a result, you saw the creation of something called the Selective Service Act, which instituted a draft, and as a result, it's between 70 and 80% of all men who eventually will serve in the U.S. military during the war as a part of the AEF are all going to be drafted. Right? They're all going to be drafted. Now, the AEF that deploys to France is led by a general by the name of John Pershing, and they begin deploying in 1917, very famously marching in Paris on the 4th of July, going into the line that fall, and will play a role in the offensives and then the process of 1918. It is a very gendered and deeply segregated expeditionary force, and one that reflected many of the cultural and social realities going on in America at that time. It is a military that had some experiences in the expedition to Mexico, what was referred to as the Punitive Expedition, the year before in 1916. The second term for us is CPI. All right, CPI. So the CPI, or what was also known as the Creel Committee, George Creel, is known as the Committee of Public Information. And this was the way in which President Woodrow Wilson sought to kind of control the flow of information from the government to the public about the war and about the many ways in which the public could get involved in the war. Much like today, where we have many different media platforms, they had many different media platforms at this time as well. They're just not using smartphones. But the CPI then would have involvement in the construction of messaging across those platforms. So anything from posters to short silent films to large-scale expositions to traveling expositions to speaking bureaus where speakers would be sent out to speak about aspects of the war. Now, this is all going to be interconnected and woven into, and really on the ground level, a lot of state and local forces and state councils of defense are going to do a lot of this. But a lot of the messaging in the process is going to originally have come from the CPI. Now, our third term is going to be the APL, and this stands for the American Protective League. Given the concern over whether or not the public was going to properly support the war, there was concern that the public needed to be essentially watched, and that the government perhaps did not have enough resources to be able to do that. And so a private organization was created that would have an association with federal forces, and they would act as kind of an, again, auxiliary arm of oversight of the public. Now, the American Protective League at its height claimed to have approximately 250,000 members, and they operated primarily in major cities in places like Chicago and elsewhere, where you had lots of industry as well that was being used for the war. And so this could involve really any number of things, from oversight around industrial sites and areas to literally sending agents into For example, churches where the services were in German, and maybe you had an APL agent who knew German, so they would go and they would listen to the sermon to make sure that the person who was preaching was being properly patriotic, right? Sort of that kind of stuff. Now, I recognize that brings up questions of discussions of speech and religious liberty, and these were questions that were asked very much during the era of the First World War, and so the APL is key for us. All right, fourth term is Meuse-Argonne Offensive. So U.S. military plays an active role across the arc of 1918, getting to being just over 20% of the soldiers in the line in the West, and they're going to be involved in this large offensive beginning in September of Meuse-Argonne. Fifth point is Versailles. So November 11th, 1918, you start to have an agreement for the fighting to halt. There is a treaty conference that is held at Versailles, and an eventual treaty is reached by 1919. Thank you very much.